Published, 7:55 Eastern Standard Time, the 30th of January 2019. Updated, 8:15 Eastern Standard Time, the 30th of January 2019. The NFL's recent announcement that concussions fell 24% in 2018 may be encouraging, but Boston University Associate Professor Lee E. Goldstein, MD, PhD, told DailyMail.com that the findings are irrelevant to the long-term consequences of the degenerative brain disease chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE). The NFL's 24% reduction in concussions over the 2018 season is misleading and irrelevant to the deeper issue of the degenerative brain disease chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE), according to one expert in the field. The last week the NFL announced that players were diagnosed with 214 concussions over the preseason and regular season in 2018, which is down from 281 in 2017, to crow about reducing concussions. While that is, in and of itself, laudatory, it's irrelevant with respect to the long-term consequences, Lee E. Goldstein, MD, PhD, an associate professor at Boston University School of Medicine and College of Engineering told DailyMail.com, that tells us nothing about what's happening to the cumulative, repetitive head injuries associated with this, and not just football, but other sports and outside sports, he added. It's a health problem. The league stopped short of directly crediting recent rule changes for the drop of concussions, such as an emphasis on helmet-to-helmet hits and kickoff modifications aimed at reducing high-speed collisions. However, NFL Chief Medical Officer Drive Alan Sills was still optimistic that the league's anti-concussion initiatives were responsible for the trend. "We are excited and grateful," Sills told reporters at the league's New York headquarters last week. "We articulated this as a goal, and we put in place a concussion reduction strategy." The last week the NFL announced that players were diagnosed with 214 concussions over the preseason and regular season in 2018, which is down from 281 in 2017. The league stopped short of directly crediting recent rule changes in the drop of concussions, such as an emphasis on helmet-to-helmet hits and kickoff modifications aimed at reducing high-speed collisions. In addition to making a number of rule changes in recent years, the NFL also instituted its own protocol aimed at preventing concussed players from re-entering a game. One feature of the protocol is the concussion tent, pictured, where players get evaluated during games, but as Goldstein sees it, the NFL's emphasis on reducing concussions is misguided because it doesn't address CTE, which can lead to symptoms like behavioral or cognitive issues, and even dementia. "We have a substantial number of cases in the brain bank who have died and meet the neuropathological diagnostic criteria for CTE, and have never had a concussion," Goldstein said. "We see these young people, 0.17-year-olds, with evidence of CTE," he continued. "There shouldn't be any evidence of any neurodegenerative disease at that age. We know that we have quite a number of cases in people of that age, early 20s or late teens, who have never had a witnessed, documented concussion in their life." An NFL spokesman did not respond to DailyMail.com's request for comment. Goldstein is a part of the Boston University research team that published a groundbreaking study a year ago showing that exposure to repeated head trauma, and not necessarily concussions, was the root cause of CTE. NFL Chief Medical Officer Drive Alan Sills was optimistic that the league's anti-concussion initiatives were responsible for the 24% drop in reported concussions in 2018. Previously, the Boston University CTE Center found signs of the disease in 110 out of 111 deceased NFL players. Several of the brains in the Boston University bank had been donated by family members of players who had committed suicide after battling CTE, which can only be diagnosed posthumously. Goldstein is quick to point out that the research equates CTE with repetitive head injuries and not with football. "Neither I, nor anybody on the team, has ever said that everyone who plays football is going to get CTE," he said. "That would be irresponsible. It happens in the military too, with blast exposure. What I can say is that your risk of developing long-term consequences, including CTE, but not exclusively CTE, goes up the longer you play football, and the earlier you start, regardless of whether you've ever had a concussion," he added. "It's not that concussions are somehow benign. Goldstein points out that other problems can be caused by concussions. However, he says he is primarily worried about the effects of subconcussive hits, because those are more numerous and typically go untreated. David Bruton of the Denver Broncos is attended to by trainers after a play that would force him out of the game when a reported concussion during a game against the Oakland Raiders from 2014. NFL trainers are given strict guidelines for evaluating players who may be concussed. Even the latest helmet technology cannot prevent subconcussive hits, which when repeated over a long period of time can increase the risk of CTE. The focus should not really be on the guy that's concussed, Goldstein said. He's going to get taken care of. You really want to be worried about the other people on the field who are not concussed, who are just hit yet again and who are going to go back on the field and get hit on the next play. Over the course of an NFL season, the overwhelming majority of hits are subconcussive, he continued. I'm not saying they're wrong for focusing on concussions, but I am saying they're misprioritizing. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, is a degenerative brain disease that is caused by repeated hits to the head. Over time, these hard impacts result in confusion, depression and eventually dementia. There has been several retired football players who have come forward with brain diseases. They are attributing their condition to playing football and the hits they took. More than 1,800 former athletes and military veterans have pledged to donate their brains to the Concussion Legacy Foundation for CTE research. CTE was usually associated with boxing before former NFL players began revealing their conditions. Goldstein's team studied the connection between repeated head trauma and CTE by conducting a controlled experiment on two groups of mice. One set had some degree of concussion from repeated closed head impacts and another group endured similar head movements through blast exposure. Closed head impacts are a type of traumatic brain injury that leaves the skull intact. What the experiment showed was that both groups were equally susceptible to suffering CTE even though only one set of mice had a concussion or concussion-like symptoms. In both cases, we see experimental CTE, he explained. We see basically everything that we see in humans. With CTE, there we have separated concussions from CTE. In both cases we get CTE. In one case it's with concussion and in the other, it's without concussion. As the NFL pointed out, 74% of players are now wearing the latest and most technologically advanced helmets, which is up from 41% in 2017. The problem, as Goldstein sees it, is that prolonged exposure to subconcussive hits is still a factor with a helmet, and that leaves players vulnerable to CTE regardless of whether the risk of concussion has been reduced. Helmets were designed to prevent skull fractures, and they're remarkably good at doing that, he said. What they don't do, no matter how you design them, is to prevent hits to the head. The only way that I am aware of to prevent CTE, and even injuries that don't rise to the level of CTE, is to prevent repetitive head injuries, he added. And frankly, a helmet doesn't do that. It's not designed to prevent hits to the head. In fact, it's designed specifically to modulate hits to the head. Goldstein does not have a solution to the NFL's problem. I'm only a scientist. That's a question outside my area of expertise, but he maintains that the importance of the NFL's progress with regards to concussions is overstated. There's just no evidence to suggest that concussions are the cause. This diagram from the Boston University study shows the telltale head movement that can cause CTE in the brains of tackled football players or soldiers exposed to a bomb blast. Goldstein's team found the correlation between repeated head trauma and CTE by conducting a controlled experiment on two groups of mice. One set had some degree of concussion from repeated closed head impacts and another group was exposed to similar head movements through blast exposure, but without the direct impact. Closed head impacts are a type of traumatic brain injury that leaves the skull intact. What the experiment showed was that both groups were equally susceptible to suffering CTE even though only one set of mice had a concussion or concussion-like symptoms.